Hello, I'm Helen from Sunbird Soap. Let's talk about shaving soap. It is my motto to use local ingredients, locally sourced or locally produced ingredients as far as possible. And shaving soap mostly have some ingredients that are either difficult for me to source or too expensive, or I doubt whether I would like to use them on myself. I'm talking about things like stearic acid, which is already processed more than what I like. By reading up a lot on the subject and by watching other people doing experiments and tutorials on shaving soap, I came to a conclusion on the matter. You need three things to make a good shaving soap. Number one is you need to do a dual lye of 60% potassium hydroxide and 40% of sodium hydroxide. The second thing is that you need quite a bit of stearic acid. How much is debatable, but you do need fats and oils that are high in stearic acid. And the third thing is you do need to know how to whip up your shaving soap correctly, because you can have everything in place, and if you do not use your shaving brush correctly, you can still end up with a shaving soap that doesn't seem like it's doing its job. Without the use of any difficult to obtain ingredients, without the addition of sodium lactate, soy wax, or stearic acid, I managed to make a very decent shaving soap, and the best of all is that it's very affordable. So you can try this. It's easy to make without the hassle of getting difficult to find ingredients. Let me show you how I did it. First, I made some oat milk by adding 1 part of whole rolled oats to 4 parts of cold water. I used cold water to prevent that slimy texture that homemade oat milk sometimes can have. You don't want to handle the milk too much either. I let it seep through a cheesecloth without squeezing the milk out. This also helps to prevent that sliminess. It takes quite a while, so just leave it and be patient. I put it in the freezer overnight. I just used silicone container, but you can use any suitable container or ice cube tray to freeze it in. 72% of my total oils consisted of beef tallow, which I melted on the stove over simmering water. You can do this, of course, in the microwave oven if you like. I just love this gentleness of steam, and as I just made a very small batch, I just prefer to do it on the stove. I found these practical and pretty bowls to mold my soap into. They fit nicely in your hand, and I was very pleased when I found them. I pre-measured my potassium hydroxide and sodium hydroxide while waiting for the tallow to melt. I just closed it because they're both very hydrophilic and love to attract water, so I just kept them closed. Although beef tallow doesn't contain as much stearic acid as some other butters do, I decided to try and see how it will go if I use beef tallow as my main source of stearic acid for making this shaving soap, as it is easy for me to obtain it. It is a local product and it's inexpensive. If you look at a breakdown of all the fatty acids contained in beef tallow, 22% of it is stearic acid, which I thought was okay for my purpose. It would have been better if it was more, but I think it is okay. I weighed out the frozen oat milk and then I added the lye, first dissolving one type before I added the next. I really don't think it matters which lye you add first. I think the fact that my oat milk was frozen really helped to prevent any kind of harsh exothermic reaction. It was a very mild thing to mix this lye because of the frozen oat milk. Also, the oat milk didn't scorch at all. I just really like to work with frozen liquid if I use some products which you want to handle gently. The oat milk cubes took a long time to melt, which made it much easier for me to work with it and preserve all its goodness. So I just put it to the side and let it melt on its own and gave it a stir afterwards. While the tallow was still very warm, I just melted the honey directly into the fat. Honey is not only very good for your skin, but it also assists in creating beautiful bubbles. Because I didn't use any coconut oil in this recipe, I added some castor oil to create some beautiful added bubbles. Coconut oil is just too cleansing, and you don't want a cleansing soap when you create a shaving soap. This is macadamia oil. It is locally produced right on my doorstep, and it has moisturizing qualities, and it contains about 5% of stearic acid also, which I needed. I also used macadamia oil as my super fat, and I super fatted up to 10%. I added some bentonite clay to my oils. I buy this in my local pharmacy, although this is an imported ingredient. From what I've read and learned from other soap makers, is that it contributes to the slippery texture that you want for shaving. Now I'm just adding my lye solution. I stirred it well again just before adding it, just to make sure that everything was thoroughly dissolved. This recipe traced very slowly because of the 60% potassium hydroxide in the lye solution, and also my lye solution was cool to start with. I stick blend in increments when working with slow trace recipes. I just blend for a minute or so, and then I just let the batter rest for 5 minutes. I always set a timer so that I won't forget about it. I just repeat this until the trace becomes thick, especially with recipes that are going to be cooked. I always try to get a nice thick trace before starting the cooking. I don't think that it takes longer to let your batter rest than with continuous blending, and above it all, it protects your stick blender from overheating, so it's best to let it rest for a little time between. You just need a bit of patience when working with potassium hydroxide. When the trace was thick enough, I just covered the bowl with some plastic wrap and let it cook over gentle steam. The plastic wrap eventually irritated me so much that I just took it off and just covered my bowl with a tea towel, and it worked just fine. If I made a bigger batch at all, I would have rather used my crock pot. After some cooking, my batter seemed like it was splitting, and I had to stick blend again, but it became very thick very fast, so it was not a big problem. And I just stirred it a few times during the cooking process. It looked much different than hot processed soap that cooks, and it also looked different than liquid soap based. So it was a different texture altogether for me. But because I make quite a bit of hot processed soap and I make quite a bit of liquid soap, I could recognize it when the soap was cooked. The color and the consistency of the soap started to change gradually, and I don't know if it was because I did it on the stove, but it took quite a long time for me before I finally took it off the stove. I was maybe a little bit uncertain about it, but in the end, when I would stir it like this, I could see it just looked cooked through. Yeah, it wasn't ready yet. It's still, although it changed in texture, I could see that it wasn't ready. So only when it looked cooked through, I took it off the stove. My batter stayed fluid throughout the whole process, and even before I added the superfat, it was very easy to stir it. I added 10% of the total oil weight as a superfat, and I used the macadamia oil for this. It is very moisturizing and nourishing. Here I'm just adding my essential oils. When using essential oils for shaving soap, it is very important not to use something like peppermint or something that is really too invigorating. Some calming oils are much better to use, that is good for facial skin. As you can see, it molded very easily, and it was a pleasure to work with this batter. And even though my soap hardened, it didn't become rock hard. I don't know how it would have been if I added stearic acid. It would have probably become much harder, but this works fine with the hardness it retained afterwards. It works very well, and the soap lasts long enough, but it didn't become rock hard like a normal bar soap. I want to acknowledge Patrick from Soapee Oaks, because he had such a clear demonstration of how to get a good lather and then create your lovely foam to apply to your skin. And without him, I don't know if I would have been able to manage to whip up the kind of lather that you're supposed to. But I will also leave a link to his channel in the description below, so that you can watch him making a fantastic shaving soap as well. I just added a tiny amount of water in an empty bowl, and then I whisked my Soapee shaving brush vigorously in here. And it produced a lovely shaving foam, exactly what you want. This shaving soap ticks all the boxes in my opinion. It creates a wonderful thick lather. It is very affordable. It just used 3 kinds of oils and fats. I didn't have any strange additives other than honey and oat milk. And it is nourishing, it is not drying, it is not cleansing. And I think it will make your shaving experience a pleasure without it costing you a fortune. Please try it out. I'm going to also leave a link to the recipe in the description. Thank you so much for watching.